if you were within a certain distance from an enemy unit, you couldn't regroup.
Yeah, it was all based off like Warhammer Fantasy rules at the time. If you played that.
Yeah, Warhammer Fantasy, of course. I used to play it big time.
Guess which army I play in Warhammer Fantasy?
Empire. I don't know.
No, come on. The clue is in the teeth.
Oh, vampire counts. There we go.
Yeah!
Vampire counts. You're one of those players? I'm sorry.
Uh,
You were a von Karstein?
well, it was one of the variations. Yeah.
I had one game against a very experienced tournament player, vampire counts.
Mhm.
And I just remember my dwarfs. I played dwarfs, believe it or not. I know it sounds
Very
weird.
powerful. Cannons. Yeah, you go from elves to dwarves.
Yeah, completely opposite to Eldar. So I was like, oh, dwarfs. Well, they are the opposite. I formed a, kind of a chevron formation. I was protecting my, cannons and stuff. And I was like, I'm ready. Let's go. Yep. And I just remember him smiling for a second and saying, okay, let's have a great game. The first thing he did was charge a single unit of skeleton horsemen into the middle of my formation, which is my Iron Breakers. And I was like, there's no way he's going to beat my Iron Breakers. They're top of the line units. He was just like, okay, well, they have Killing Blow. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. Decapitating
It was
strike,
just
essentially.
a massacre, dude. It was a massacre. He massacred my Iron Breakers, and they weren't unbreakable. So I rolled dice, and because I lost combat back then, if you had fear, you needed double ones to pass. Didn't roll double ones. He ran me down, and then he smacked into like 3 or 4 cannon crews and just wiped them out too. And then he wheeled around the next turn because my dwarfs were so slow they couldn't even react.
Yeah.
He wheeled around and just took out everything with just a single unit of cavalry. And I was just like, okay, great game. I don't know what I did wrong, except just be a dwarf.
Turn up. Yeah.
Just play the dwarves how they're supposed to play, but okay.
It very much varied depending on the edition. If Fear was good, then they were an amazing one. If it was like the later editions, where it was like, oh, on Fear, then you're like reduced weapon skill, it was awful. But in the earlier games, there was 2 ways the battle would end. Either as a Vampire Counts player, you would end the battle with more models than you started with, or you would barely touch the enemy and get wiped out.
Yeah, that's kind of how I figured. But
yeah,
I just during that
sniper shot, something that kills your general, there's no more army.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I didn't play against vampires this way, but I played against Tomb Kings that way, and it was kind of the same thing where they crumbled if they didn't have
the leader.
Yeah, so
not even the general, because it's the support spellcaster.
Absolutely. He had one on a chariot, and I remember he had a unit of big chariots on the side of the battlefield. I was like, I'm going to aim my cannon over there. And I just basically said, okay, back then you guessed the inches. So I guessed the amount of inches and everything. I hit the guy, and he was like, okay, I'm going to take my lookout, sir. He rolls a 1. And I just saw the look on his face, man. It was just pure fear, dude.
Good
he was like, okay, well, I have a ward save. And back then, ward saves, I mean, you were lucky to get a 4+.
It was essentially, for the 40k players, a ward save is basically like a feel no pain.
Yeah. It's essentially that, exactly that. And then they had regen on top of that, but I had flaming attacks, and he was just dead. He failed his ward save, that was it. Cannon did D6 wounds, blasted him right off the table. And I remember him just and just his whole army was just vastly reduced in ability. I just remember getting into combat with the unit and just it evaporating basically in one round of combat. I was like, oh, wow, I thought these guys were kind of tougher. He was like, well, they would have been, but you killed my Lich Priest turn 1. So, and it was just a very easy game. So, yeah, I could. And also the magic was gone too. And I think magic is a big part.
There was one game where I was playing against Orcs. I went first. My vampire used a spell, got a miscast, blew himself up, my army crumbled, my opponent didn't even take a turn 1.
Oh my god. That's absolutely insane, man. That is so insane. But that's how it was. I mean, it was like weird things like that.
You had to be very careful, like, don't just use the spells.